WFYI podcast brought to you by Bloomington, Indiana, an American college town offering food and drink, college sports, outdoor activities, live music, cool art, and good times daily. Everyone is welcome in Bloomington. More information at visitbloomington.com.
This is WFYI News Now. It's March 19th, and I'm Darian Benson. On today's show, Governor Holcomb vetoes the antisemitism bill, saying it doesn't go far enough. A Republican candidate for governor outlines his plan for the economy, a new federal grant meant to reconnect communities divided by construction projects, and a new documentary from WFYI explores the fight over access to books for kids and young people in Indiana.
It's emblematic of something happening across the country.
Those stories coming up, but first, people incarcerated in Indiana state prisons might soon have access to financial aid to pay for Ivy Tech community college classes. From WFYI's education desk, Sydney Dauphiné has more on the expansion of federal Pell Grants.
In 2020, Congress passed a law to lift the 26-year-old ban on people in prison from having access to federal Pell Grants. It's taken years for rules about the change to be finalized. Now, Ivy Tech Community College announced the Indiana Department of Correction approved 2 automotive technology certificates that can be paid for by the grant. A Pell Grant is for people with exceptional financial needs who want an undergraduate degree. Next, the U.S. Department of Education and Ivy Tech's accrediting agencies must approve the programs before people incarcerated in state prisons can apply for financial aid. I'm Sydney Dauphiné.
Governor Eric Holcomb vetoed a bill yesterday that would define and ban antisemitism in state public education institutions. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Violet Kumber-Weiland reports the governor says the bill does not go far enough to prevent antisemitism.
The bill that passed out of both the House and the Senate used the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, but leaves out IHRA's examples of anti-Semitism. In a press release, the governor says he is unable to sign this legislation as it failed to incorporate the entire IHRA definition. The inclusion of these examples in initial legislation drew controversy, with critics saying they prevented free speech and conflated criticism of the State of Israel with anti-Semitism. The governor also signed a proclamation that says Indiana endorses the IHRA working definition, including its examples. The Indianapolis Jewish Community Relations Council and several lawmakers released statements in support of the proclamation. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Violet Kumber-Weiland.
The bill now goes back to the House and Senate, which has the opportunity to override the veto with a simple majority vote. If both chambers achieve that majority, the bill becomes law. And Republican gubernatorial candidate Brad Chambers unveiled a 10-point economic plan yesterday that highlights tax reform, childcare, entrepreneurship, and housing. Chambers, the former state commerce secretary, says more people have approached him about property taxes during the campaign than any other issue.
Let's create a simpler formula so everybody can understand it. I'm a real estate guy, and sometimes I don't understand how an assessment came to be.
Chambers says he also wants to explore ways to reduce spikes in property taxes, particularly for older Hoosiers and veterans. His economic plan would create 2 new cabinet positions in state government, one for entrepreneurship and innovation, and the other to lead a state water resource plan.
Water is a strategic asset of Indiana. Some states don't have that strategic asset. We do. So now let's inventory it. Now let's make someone focused on managing that asset of ours.
Early in-person voting for Indiana's primary begins April 9th. And for our final story today, over the last several years, parents and a network of organized conservative groups have pressured school and library boards across the country to remove certain books from their collections, claiming they're housing pornographic material. Reader Restrict, a new documentary film from WFYI, explores how this movement has taken root in Indiana. WFYI Education Desk Editor Eric Weddle and investigative reporter Lee Gaines discuss why they made the film.
So I know why I wanted to make this documentary, but Eric, why did you want to produce this with me, and why did you allow me to spend 9 months working on it?
Sure. Well, I guess first off, I didn't think it'd take 9 months to get it done, but it did. But I think the main reason was, WFYI News, we do great journalism online and on radio for audio, and we'd never done like a real video documentary with our colleagues here. And so that was the main thing. They seemed like a great story. It was unfolding in front of us with the changes at the State House, with laws being passed, and then the ongoing fight at Hamilton East Public Library, which everyone, was watching around the state and the country. And it seemed like a great way, for you and I to kind of do something in a different format and tell a story in a different way. What's your answer to that question?
I also really wanted to collaborate with our video department and just make my first ever, documentary. It's not something I'd done before. I've been a newspaper reporter and an audio reporter, but not that kind of journalist. So that was really exciting. And then, like you said, this law was passed here. It's emblematic of something happening across the country. And then we saw, just by happenstance, we didn't plan to cover what happened at Hamilton East Public Library, but it was happening while we were filming for coverage of this particular law, and the two issues interconnected so seamlessly that it was just a wonderful opportunity for us to give our audience like a really deep look at a really important issue that's impacting not just places around the country, but actually impacting us here in Indiana.
And so what are your big takeaways from the movie that we made?
A lot of it is just about how our democratic processes work and how if enough people are angry about something and make their voices known as they did so in Hamilton East, that you can change policies. You can put pressure on policymakers to rescind what you believe is bad policy, which is what happened at Hamilton East. A group of people joined by the famous author John Green said, hey, this policy that resulted in the relocation of roughly 2,000 books from the youth collection is bad policy and you should get rid of it. And that's actually what happened, along with the removal or the resignation of the board members responsible for it. But on the flip side, HEA 1447, which is the law that makes it easier to request removals of books in schools here in Indiana, that law was passed at the very last minute in the 2023 session behind closed doors, not allowing people an opportunity to really oppose it or push back against it. And what about you?
For me, it was the stories behind them, how people were impacted personally. I think we really talked to a few people, an author, a teen, and how their life, how they've got to the point in their life and how these changes have really impacted them. And even from people on both sides of this issue, I think we heard a lot of, honest discussion, whether you agree with it or not, or why people are doing this. And I think that was something that was really powerful to hear.
And why do you think people should see the film?
Well, I think, right now this issue is playing out nationally. It's going to be part of the election, the presidential election, state elections. And I think if you know about the issue, you're going to learn something about it. And if you don't know about why people are fighting about school libraries and public libraries, I think you're going to learn a lot as well and kind of see some very clear reasons why this is happening. And what's your pitch for why people should see this?
I think there's a lot of honesty in this film, both from the perspective of the policymakers. You get a real look at why they're trying to do this, and also from the perspective of those people who are most impacted by these decisions, by these restrictions on access to books.
All right. Lee, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
You can stream the documentary Read or Restrict now on the PBS app. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Abriana Herron, Drew Daudelin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Darian Benson. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you liked today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.